Jonathan, good afternoon, and good afternoon to those on LinkedIn watching us live. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Jonathan, for being here up front.
It's a pleasure.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm really well, thanks. I'm really excited about doing this presentation with you this morning, and so I'm stoked. Let's go.
You call it a presentation, but we haven't actually done much preparation at all. You and I just talked, and
well, I did some preparation.
Okay, no, that's good to know because I did not. But it just came about quite naturally, right? You and I talked, and I just said to you, we have to do this for this week's session. So, we'll come to this, but why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and give some background?
Sure.
And let's start
Sure.
there.
Well, actually, so it's interesting how you and I ended up getting connected to talk about this. It's kind of an example of what I'm going to talk about. It's kind of an example of how it unfolds and how the things that we're doing, we don't necessarily know who we're going to run into in the next 10 minutes, the next 15 minutes to have a really vital or important conversation that might really change the direction in which we're going. And so we want to be always sort of mentally aware of this and mentally prepared for it. So when we do see something like this interesting conversation, it's like, well, what can we do with this? What might we be able to have a conversation about that might be beneficial? So before we really begin, though, Rian, I want to just take a moment to become present. So for everybody who's joining us right now, either live in the moment or virtual or in a recorded version of this is being recorded, I think. So if you're watching it live, or if you're watching this sometime later in the future, just take a moment to become present and just notice any thoughts or feelings or sensations that you may be having right now. And just, take a moment and feel your feet on the floor, feel the weight of your body in the chair, and just notice your head on your shoulders and feel your neck and just feel what that's like. And then I'm going to just invite you to take 3 deep breaths. Let's do this together. All right? There. So this is something that I always do at the beginning of most meetings and at the beginning of every day, sort of have a mindful check-in, kind of notice exactly what's going on for me right now. And so many people will probably be familiar with the idea of mindfulness and mindful meditation. And the reason why this is important is it is really about becoming aware of what's going on for us right now in this moment and not getting carried away with it, getting carried away with difficulties that may be occurring around us. So this is a really important part for supporting mental health in the work that we do. So let's just get some participation from our audience and ask everybody just to, if you can type a word into the chat box. There is a chat box, isn't there, Rian?
There's a comment. You can leave a comment and we'll see it live. Yes.
So take a moment and just type a word or two that describes how you're feeling right now.
While we wait for that, Jonathan, I can tell you how I am feeling. I mean, it's interesting that you did that exercise, and you said put your feet on the floor and feel your feet on the floor, right? That is, I mean, what's the intention behind that? Because it made me feel, I don't want to say anchored, but here and firm, right? Is that why you say that?
Well, yes, sure, absolutely. And I think that what's important about that is that the meaning that comes from that is yours personally. And so when we invite people to do that, it it's really up to them to kind of notice what's going on for them, and that feeling of being anchored. So, I mean, taking a moment to become present is a really good opportunity for us, especially in the midst of chaos and when the craziest things are going on for us during the day, to maybe take a moment and feel our feet on the floor and become anchored or grounded or centered. And then from that place, we have a better opportunity to address what's really coming at us. Because if we're not paying attention, if we're not being mindful about how I'm experiencing all of this right now, then it just gets worse. We begin to spin and we get out of control. And I think it's probably safe to say that we've all been there. We've all had a time where we've just lost it, and our minds just go crazy, and we lose the plot. And somehow we have to come back and be able to operate from a place of groundedness and centeredness and stability, so that we can not only take care of the people that we're doing work for, or whatever it might be, but also look after ourselves. And this comes up a lot. I've seen this a lot these days, and it's an idea that I've thought of for a long time. When you get on a plane and we go through the safety check, what do they say about the oxygen mask?
They say put it on first before you help somebody else.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I mean, so we kind of look at that and go, yes, that's a funny metaphor, ha ha ha. But it's a true metaphor. We cannot help others if we are not taking care of ourselves. So that's why I think it's important to talk about this.
I want to comment on that exact sentiment, but there is a comment there from Rudolph. I'm going to just see what happens if I bring it on screen. I've never done this.
Give it a go.
I'm going to say show.
Let's try.
Okay, so there we go. That's his answer to your question.
Oh, is that much more relaxed just from the moment of check-in? Or is that how you're feeling today?
I think that's how it felt after you said, put your feet down, take 3 deep breaths, and so on. So, if there's anybody else that can tell us, what was your question? And how do you feel right now in the moment?
Yeah, just what's one or two words that just describes what you're feeling right now?
Okay, brilliant. While we wait for that, again, you talked about put on your own oxygen mask before you help somebody else. There was a thing that came up yesterday in a discussion which I thought was really, really good. We were preparing for a discussion we're having later in the week about management is also human, and somebody said you need to lead yourself first before you can lead others. And I thought it was also quite applicable to what you just said about the oxygen mask as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Leading self is really critical. And, and part of that leading self piece is knowing who we are. And that may sound silly, because at first we might go, well, of course I know who I am. But do we actually sometimes take the time and just notice what's, and I may sound like a broken record around this, but it's a piece that I really, really want people to think about and be curious about. Do we really know what's going on for us right now? Are we thinking about our thoughts and noticing our feelings and noticing the impact that the world around us is having on us right now? And in turn, from that place of self-awareness, are we then being aware of how some of our behaviors and some of the things that we might be doing might be impacting others? And so given the context of the relationship that we might be in with another person, let's just say, since we're talking in the travel space right now, thinking about a travel client or somebody that we might be working with who may also be in some sort of a predicament, and they need us to be calm and be able to support them throughout whatever it is that they're doing, because that's part of our role in that relationship. So I just mentioned a little bit about the external world and the external things that are going on around us, and I want to introduce a mental model to you. And before I introduce it, I just want to say a little bit about mental models. And so, Rian, when I say mental model, what comes up for you? What do you think of?
It sounds like a framework of sorts, something to go by, some sort of guide. So that's what that sounds like to me.
Okay. So mental models are the way we think about things. We've got process models. We've got how we do things. So we have these formal process models that we might have, in a business setting where these are the steps in order to do this. But then we have these sort of informal process models that we have where we know that when something happens and these are the things that we do. Then there's also sort of emotional models that we have in the case where when somebody says this to me or when this occurs, I typically respond this way. And these are some of the things that we're doing, again, sort of in autopilot, and we're sort of doing them in a way that we're not paying attention to. So habits that we've picked up in the past, or just ways that we learn from our parents, we learn from other examples of people around us, and we might be expressing behaviors that are not necessarily congruent with what we're thinking. But I'm starting to get a little bit out of control there, so I'll bring it back a wee bit. So what I wanted to do was just talk about this mental model to address the world around us. And the reason I want to give you a mental model for addressing the world around us is that the world around us is pretty crazy. It always has been. And I was thinking the other day, our world has always been pretty chaotic with periods of calm more than the other way around. I mean, if you go back 2,000 years, I mean, how many wars and famines and different things that have been occurring, and they're still occurring. So when we have a way to address something, then we have a better chance at understanding it, and then a better chance at working through it. So the mental model I wanted to offer you was the model of Vuca. And Vuca stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So I'll just put that up there so you can see it. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what this means is, do you have a question before I go on?
No, I was just going to, first of all, there's a comment from Andy about how he feels, but I know why that is, because he's got two very young kids there. I don't know whether you want to go back to that or not, but
sure.
When you talked about when you mentioned to me, you said that I have a question. You said Vuca, I thought it was designed for what happened in the last 18 months, but you were about to tell us it's not been the case. So that was my only comment. But anyway, you ask how people are feeling. There's Andy's current state of mind.
What does he say? What does Andy say? Oh, brain fried. Yeah. He's got two young children, and that'll do it.
That's correct.
So the interesting thing about that, and if you think about that, we go through these different stages of our life, and our life is actually never the same. We go through these periods, and so often, and I may be jumping ahead a little bit on this, but so often we sort of develop these strategies when we're younger, and then we kind of hang on to these strategies as this is the way I typically operate, and I'm going to hang on to this. And so then along comes children and other different things, and a house and a mortgage, or different things, or a new job or a job loss, whatever it might be. And if we're sort of hanging on to this initial strategy of this is how I've always done it, this is why I'm always concerned when people say, well, when things go back to normal. Yeah, they're not going back anywhere. We're going forward into something new, because normal keeps changing. But I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So when thinking about, and I'm actually glad that Andy brought that up, and then sort of generated this conversation, because this is really the idea about how we navigate Vuca. We want to make sure that we are able to notice, again, the types of strategies that we've typically used, but also be willing to let go of those and practice something new. Because it's if we try to keep striving ahead into tomorrow with the strategies from yesterday, it won't work. We're just going to be disappointed, and we're going to eventually fail at those things, and then we're going to feel bad about it too. We're going to say, why isn't this working? It worked yesterday. So just back to Vuca for a moment. So the notion of volatile is that things are subject to change at any given time without any notice. So that's the notion of volatility. Uncertain.
That happens all the time in the travel industry, as we know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have a Vuca business. And there's a lot of Vuca industries for sure. And it's just, becomes Vuca upon Vuca. So Vuca times Vuca. And it just, and when you think of uncertain, is there's no reliable cues or predictable outcomes that will help us to make any choices. So we kind of, we're not sure about that. The notion of complex is there are so many moving parts which are often linked to, attached to, and also reliant on other moving parts. And many or most of those are unseen. And the last piece of being ambiguous, it means meanings are not clear, open to interpretation. So my interpretation may be different than yours. Different perspectives, information is sketchy at best or doesn't exist at all. So that's a notion of the Vuca world. And the interesting thing about navigating Vuca is that we have to be able to do it from both a rational and an emotional perspective. Now, most of us typically have a preferred instinctual way of dealing with things. We either deal with things from a rational perspective, or we deal with things from an emotional perspective. Those are typically our preferences. So we have to be able to kind of, first of all, understand what our typical preference is, and then be willing to sort of look across the aisle and say, well, if I'm emotional, if I address the world from more of an emotional perspective. So in my case, I kind of go to emotions first and feelings and think about people. But what I need to do is look across that divide and say, okay, what are some of the ideas that I need to have, and what are some of the actual things that I need to do? What do I need to do that's necessary in order to navigate Vuca? So if I sit on the emotional side, I miss a whole opportunity of things to help navigate Vuca. And if I'm only dealing with the rational side of things, well, here's the process. These are the ideas. Then I'm missing the idea. That I'm missing the human side of it. I'm missing the people. I'm missing the emotional side. We've got to be able to practice both.
Interesting. Do you not think there's obviously a case where it depends on how your day has gone that you will respond differently, right? So you might be rational on most days, but suddenly you respond emotionally. And also, Andy is just reminding us that he doesn't have 2 but 3 kids. So. So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and his household for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing, when you think about travel. I mean, just think about getting people together. I mean, there's nothing really more Vuca than that. I mean, we are as individuals, we're complex. I mean, sometimes when we have conversations with ourselves, you know how challenging that can be from time to time. And so imagine adding another person, and then another person, and then another person, and then a system of people, and then you've got these you've got interactive, intersecting organizational relationship systems. And it's amazing we've done as well as we have.
Yes, it is amazing. It is amazing. I wrote down something that you said earlier on, which I really like. I don't know whether you can talk about it. You said you might come to that, so maybe I'm jumping ahead now. And I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. No, go ahead.
But you talked about things don't go back to normal. We go ahead with change. I really like that. Because people, especially in the travel industry, there are plenty of agents who are waiting for the return to business travel or the return to how things were. And, there is acknowledgement that obviously it won't be the same. Things have changed. But, it's a really good way of looking at it, that you can't go back. You can only go forward.
Yeah.
And with change. I do like that quite a lot.
Absolutely. And I mean, so I've been in the travel industry since 1985. And I actually grew up in the travel industry because my dad started in the travel industry here in Toronto. And he opened our family travel agency in 1962. So you can imagine how different the industry's become since then. And, if you think about the last time we got together as in person, at an event, and what's one thing that sort of more senior travel agents like to talk about? It's the old days. Remember back when you used to be able to just walk onto a plane and you could smoke on the plane or whatever it might be. we always talk about the good old days, you know, and I think that it's important to reminisce about the good old days from that emotional perspective. Like this is why we had a good time. You know, we were together. We were, you know, we were exploring new places and you know, seeing different cultures, smoking and drinking and whatever it might be.
Yeah, we were swearing at the ticket printer. It's
yeah, absolutely.
We find quite a lot on the LinkedIn groups, on, you know, the travel groups on LinkedIn. They definitely want to talk about those days, and it's good because it creates fond memories, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's actually how I ended up getting connected with you, because somebody had put something on, does anybody remember a handwritten ticket? And I'm like, oh my God, right. Of course. Right. And I mean, you could backdate those suckers and get away with all kinds of stuff that you can't nowadays. But anyhow, I'm digressing. So I think the point about thinking about what, you know, going back to normal, and I mean, it's kind of an interesting mental model that we have, you know, this idea of things returning to normal. And because right now we feel like we're not in a normal state. And so my invitation to everybody to think about this is sort of to maybe take that notion of returning to normal and set it aside, or, you know, stick a pin in it somewhere so you don't have to completely abandon it if you don't want to. But then start to think about the notion of when things become a little more predictable. And I think that's what we like to equate normalcy with, is when things are a little more predictable than they are right now. You know, Monday kind of looks like Tuesday, which looks like Wednesday, and then September looks like October, and then this year kind of looks like last year, you know, that kind of thing. We've been doing this for a while, but we've really been interrupted and disrupted by, you know, the pandemic that we've been experiencing. So I think if we can think about it from that perspective, and again, this is about sort of choosing our mindset as well, which is another part of, you know, that the idea of mindful meditation, which is attention training. We want to be able to really strengthen the muscle of our attention, and we can focus on the things that we want to focus on, and we can choose that, so we're not distracted by anything and everything, which we can easily be. So if we can somehow change that mental model for ourselves of things returning to normal, to looking ahead to things becoming a little more predictable, and then we can begin to become a little more comfortable with setting some strategies that are going to work for now. They may not work for too long. And I think this is the idea of Vuca. Why we want to keep thinking about Vuca is that best practices are something that we want to maybe develop and use, but don't hold on to them so tightly that when a change occurs, we can say, okay, this best practice doesn't work anymore. What's the best thing we can do now? So the idea about operating through Vuca is not necessarily choosing a single solution. We do things this way, but seeking what we call good process. So this is what we're going to do now until we need to make some sort of an adjustment. And this requires us to be open and paying attention and looking down the road, or looking at things from a 30,000 foot level, to kind of pay attention to what might be changing right now, what might be coming up. What are the things that I'm not paying attention to right now that I might need to be? And it sounds like a lot of work, but when we really begin to start practicing this, it becomes less of an extra thing to do and more of a built-in way of being. No, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. There we go. Someone had to do it, and someone had to say it, right? So there we go. We got the phrase. I think that's the phrase
That's the phrase of this kind of a thing. You're
it's
on
the
mute.
phrase of the century, absolutely. So I'm sorry about that. I was just saying, I'm making lots of notes because there's a lot of parallels I can draw. Today we're talking about navigating this world, and for the travel industry, as you know, it's never been more volatile, more uncertain, more complex. But what you've just said really sunk into me is that the change happens, but that change is going to change, and that change is going to change. That change is going to become volatile. That change is going to become uncertain. So you can't say this is the way we do it. And it works very similarly in a startup software company, right? If you develop something in software, you have to think about what are people going to need next year and the year after, etc. How do you remain relevant as a provider of that service? So you constantly have to think about what's going to change. You can't say this is the way people need a solution and that's never going to change, because especially in our industry, like we reminisce about paper tickets, but take that example. When there were paper tickets, there were solutions required to deal with that. And then e-tickets came along, and then there were solutions required to deal with that. And the next thing is going to come along. So, yes, it's very, very relevant.
Absolutely. So it's funny when you mention e-tickets, and again, it's a great example of how we really get used to our process mental models about how we do things. And I specifically remember when e-tickets were announced, and I guess I can't remember when that was, sometime back in the early 90s. And I remember sitting in my office thinking, my gosh, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
How is the client? They have to tear off that counterfoil and hand it over, and then it gets stapled into a boarding pass, and then they walk with that boarding pass to the gate. And it took me a while.
It was my exact thoughts. And I know, I used to have a weekend job at the airport doing check-in, and that, we did that. We took the coupon into the back of the boarding pass. And, when you forgot to tear the coupon, you had to go on the plane before it departed, and you had a certain amount of minutes to get the coupon from the passenger, and it was crumpled up in his pocket and all that stuff. So that was my exact same thought when they announced that. I said, how it's going to get lost? How are you going to prove that you have a ticket?
Yeah. And if you lost it, you were in big trouble.
That's right.
I mean, those things were like gold.
It was physical money. It was physical money. Yes.
I can still remember times in the office preparing our BSB or ARC on a Monday, and can't find it, and tearing the office apart looking for
a coupon,
a counterfoil which has been attached by a paper clip to the back of some file.
That's right.
Vuca.
And so, we could not comprehend that, right? Now, think about how crazy the idea of a physical ticket sounds.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So, absolutely. That's a great example of how we resist change. And, and when things are changing, when thought leaders and people who are making these decisions to bring in change, they say, we're going to now have electronic tickets, or here's what's coming next. And of course, we're so attached, we're firmly fixed to our mental model and our way of doing these. We go, no, I don't want that, because it's different and I'm not used to it, and that's unusual. And then when you think about how hard we're putting on the brakes around something, and again, this is coming back to our thoughts and awareness of what's going on for us right now. So when we think about how much effort and energy we put into struggling against a new idea or something that we don't like, it's exhausting, and it does nothing, So again, the idea of I wasn't planning on talking about this, but here we are. The idea of having this radical acceptance. And so when I talk about radical acceptance, it doesn't mean that we're giving into a new idea or giving into a thing or acquiescing or we're agreeing with it or that we think it's right. But what it is that we are accepting it as an unfortunate reality that's going on right now for us. And it may be a good thing later. But whatever this new thing is that's coming at us, we resist it. We go, this is terrible. But if we can address it as an unfortunate reality and express radical acceptance, then all of that energy that we put into resisting it goes away. And we now have energy and brain space to actually work through it.
There's a lot of energy in the travel industry against doing things and changing. It is an unfortunate truth. And, I'm not saying that too negatively, but I think a lot of agents will recognize that as well. Change inside a TMC is very difficult to achieve. So, I like the way that you think about it, is to think about the energy you're putting into that resistance, right? And where can you use that better? Just to bring us back to something you said about the volatility. So you talked about looking ahead at what might change. So that's one of the fundamentals in your, I don't want to say guide to navigating the Vuca world, because it's all volatile, right? But I'm trying to get to a point where we're going to talk about that, and then you just mentioned about radical acceptance. It's not always easy to see that far ahead, right? Sometimes things happen, and you have to deal with them very quickly. And if you respond to things emotionally, and it's all up in the air. So, is this why you bring it back to being in the moment and calming yourself down and just not, just grounding yourself right before you make a decision and a thought, right?
Absolutely. I mean, noticing, and you might get tired of me saying this, but noticing what's going on for me right now. What are my thoughts and feelings about this? And when we do that, there's an empowering part of that. We all of a sudden feel like we've gained control of ourselves. And I think it's one of the things that we have to sort of radically accept in the world, and so many of us don't, is that really nothing is within our control. I mean, not a thing. I mean, and this you can get into sort of a philosophical conversation around this. I happen to appreciate Stoic philosophy, where you're reading Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and whatnot. And the whole idea behind that stuff is not about being macho and tough. And so we're talking large S Stoic versus small S Stoic, where we're, not about stiff upper lip, not about, standing like that, but really, really actually quite the opposite. Accepting the fact that everything is outside of our control. And the only thing that we can control, the only real thing that we can control right now is what's going on in here. And we say, well, I can control my body. And yeah, to a certain degree, we can. I can lift up a pen and write and hold a glass of water. But what happens when we get sick? What happens when something, then we even lose the control of our bodies in that case. So if we can have real control over our minds and be able to direct our attention to the things that are important and the things that matter, then we have a fighting chance at navigating everything and staying, as mentally well as we possibly can, mentally and emotionally well as we possibly can.
And then, so let me I can draw a parallel to that, to the session we had just before this one, where we talked to people who had to leave the industry after 20, 24, some people more than that years, right? They were in the industry for that long. And, obviously due to the downturn and the economic pressure on their companies, they had to leave. And we talked to them about that change. And almost all of them said, accepting that is going to happen and then dealing with that was really the point that made them move forward, right? So that fits into your radical acceptance stance there, but that was a very good example of that actually happening and people having to go through that.
Well, I left the industry, as you know. I mean, so the good news was that I've always been so interested in human psychology and team leadership and looking at ourselves introspectively and whatnot, and sort of asking those questions. What's going on for me right now? Why am I here? What's my purpose in this world? This has been something that, was part of my travel journey, but also part of another journey, and which is why I got into coaching, why I became, interested in leadership development and personal development and whatnot. So the good news around that was 10 years ago, I started to pursue that as a sort of a side career. And it was, and it overtook my role in travel, which is fine, because what I feel what I'm doing now is more important. I'm one of the things that I got into travel. One of the reasons was to be in service of others, and I'm still in service of others, but in a different way, from a different role. And I mean, this is again another, knowing our roles and understanding what our executive roles are, and then all of our secondary and inner roles is another part of the framework that I use to navigate Vuca. I mean, we haven't even begun to really talk about that, but this notion of what is my role. So the self-awareness piece, again, demands that we notice what's going on for us right now. But then we start thinking about, well, what's my role in things? And I think that actually that's an interesting segue into the idea of how much drama we can get pulled into in the current environment or in any environment. Quite often we might feel like, oh, I feel like a victim, or I feel like I'm rescuing somebody, or I have a blaming drama role coming on, or I'm rationalizing away information. So there's four drama roles that I use in my leadership model: victim, blamer, rationalizer, and rescuer. And when we feel like we're in a blaming role, and especially with a client, like, a client calls on a Friday afternoon, we're trying to leave or whatever, and we start to think, oh, this stupid client, or whatever it might be. If we say to her, and so maybe they've got themselves into trouble somehow. They've done it, and you go, oh, they did this themselves, they're stupid. But I think if we consider ourselves being in relationship with that client, we need to ask ourselves, what am I accountable for in this situation? And then that immediately helps us exit that blamer role and the victim role, because then we feel empowered. We kind of begin to notice our role, we notice what we're accountable for, and then we kind of remember what our purpose is, and we can come back to managing a situation with calmness and clarity. How does that sound?
It sounds pretty spot on. Absolutely. The what am I accountable for? Yes, it happens all the time. I mean, the customer calls from the airport, and there's chaos, and there's blame, and there's anger, and but taking that deep breath and asking that question and going back to, this is my role, this is what I should be doing. Yeah, I think very, very good advice. Absolutely.
So what else do you want to cover in this? We've talked a lot about this stuff, and I want to be careful about sort of repeating myself and going on and on about the same thing. I think one of the things that I wanted to sort of offer as a way to manage Vuca there's sort of four things that we want to pay attention to, and I've actually written them down. So, I mean, I know them, but I want to just make sure that I deliver them as clearly as possible. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to and managing our relationships, and thinking about, when we need to have a conversation, being aware of who needs to be a part of this conversation. Who might I need to speak to in order to fix this or resolve this, or whatever it might be, or share a new idea with. We also have to think about how we're keeping our commitments, and and what does that even mean? So noticing when we get into a commitment. So when we're in a situation with a client, what is sort of the unwritten commitment that is going on here? Well, the unwritten commitment is, I'm your professional travel advisor, and I'm here. I'm going to look after you no matter what, type of thing. So we've got to think about, are we keeping our commitments? And if we're breaking our commitments, how are we noticing that and then repairing those? Secondly, we want to make sure that we're getting clarity on our roles. What is it exactly that we're doing? What are we accountable for? And what's the power that we have to execute this role? So making sure that we have role clarity, but also make sure that we have understanding of processes, and making sure that others have understanding of the processes that we might be setting out. Are we sharing information with clients appropriately and letting them know exactly how things go? I'm going to leave this one for last, and I'm going to skip to this next one. We want to make sure that we're expressing authentic appreciation as well for others. So everybody else who's in our relationship system, making sure that we're saying good morning to people, making sure that we're asking how people are, and that it's authentic. And we're also addressing shared interests. So if there's people in our relationship system that may not be in our immediate vicinity, or if it doesn't look like we necessarily have anything in common, how do we find the shared interest, and how do we address that together? And finally, I left this one to last because I want to, it's kind of been the overarching idea that we've been talking about. It's really being able to manage our mindsets and choosing what we want to pay attention to. And we've already talked about this, but the addressing the difficult reality. And when we're confronted with a difficult reality, like what's going on right now, one of the best things that we can think about or ask ourselves is, what am I 100% committed to? You know, what are the things that what am I here for? What am I committed to? And checking in on what my commitment level is. And again, self-awareness. You know, are we actually committed to the things that we think we're committed to? Or, I mean, this is a totally other conversation, or is this somebody else's idea that I've committed to? I mean, you can, you know, get into the notion of, you know, sometimes we take a job on because it's what our parents wanted us to do and not what we actually wanted to do. So we actually committed to that, but somehow it ended up happening and here I am. You know what I mean? So, but being really clear on what I'm committed to. And if we're doing the things that we're committed to, then that helps us to be motivated to work through the unfortunate reality. And all of this helps us to remain grounded and centered and, you know, be able to just meet this VUCA world head on, emotionally and rationally.
I've got a few questions about some of those points. I want to get back to you, but before we do that, we're talking at the moment a lot about these things as an individual level and people working individually in their companies, etc. Can we bring a little bit of the VUCA or navigating a VUCA world into context for somebody that's a business owner and whose business is at risk and whose business is facing, you know, real difficulties? Because that's the reality of a lot of, you know, travel companies today. They are definitely struggling. So, you know, there is a lot of change happening in the industry, obviously not all good, and there's a lot of uncertainty about if things are going to go back and, you know, when things are going back. I mean, I just spoke to someone this morning where there was this great news about the transatlantic route opening up now for people from abroad coming to the States, and the first thing that hit some of the markets were, oh, but some vaccinations are not accepted. So now they have to go through that. So again, you know, there's the uplift, and then there's, oh, but there's this uncertainty about, will my customers be able to travel? The complexity, I mean, I don't have to even begin to tell anybody in the travel industry how complex it is now to get somebody from point A to point B, right? It's just the rules and the things they have to go through and understand, and it creates so much nervousness for them. So just you know, you've got 4 grounding points there for someone in a personal environment. Are those equally applicable for somebody managing and running a business?
Absolutely. So I think, as you know, as a business leader, you want to be able to, you know, have a look at this. And by the way, it's the 4D framework that I'm talking about. And so as a business leader, you want to make sure that whatever you're looking at it through the lens of this idea that am I paying attention to relationships? Am I clarifying roles, accountability, and authority? Am I avoiding drama? Am I appreciating? Am I expressing authentic appreciation for others? Am I addressing a shared interest? And most importantly, in this case, am I addressing an unfortunate reality? And am I 100% committed? And so I think all of those things, as we sort of begin to unpack them, and when we get into that deeper conversation around that, we really will realize that just doing one of these 4 dimensions is not enough. We have to be able to manage all 4. And typically, again, as human beings, we have an instinctual preference for some of these. So quite often, if we're process driven, we will most often forget the emotional side of things, where we're appreciating people and addressing shared interests. If we're a big ideas person, we're quite often forgetting a team or forgetting who needs to be part of that conversation. So actually, it's interesting. I know a number of agency owners who have been successful in navigating this really, really difficult landscape, and they've done all of those things. So they've really been open and transparent with everybody in the organization. So they've made sure that they've appropriately included everybody. They haven't withheld information. They've set out what their commitments are and made sure that if they cannot meet those commitments, that they let people know that something's changed. We can no longer meet this commitment. So again, it's all above board. And when we talk about it, it sounds like, oh yeah, that's easy. Why? Of course you do that. But when we're in the moment and we're sort of bombarded with VUCA, we're not necessarily thinking about that stuff right away.
But that was my immediate thought when we started talking. I thought, what is this guy going on about? This is obvious. I mean, this is obviously bad. It doesn't happen. And the very fact that I haven't even heard about VUCA till now. I mean, that was a big shocking thing for me, because it is obvious, yet we don't do it, and it's so important to be mindful of. And it's not a difficult acronym to remember, and if you keep it in mind, then it's easy to keep thinking about those things, right? So yeah,
absolutely,
you're very
and
right.
The more we think about it. So and again, if you go back to the idea around electronic tickets over paper tickets, you and I both experienced the same problem. We were like, man, how's this going to work? But the more we kind of spent time thinking about it, we began to understand it, and then it became easy. So it's just like any of these other practices that we're talking about, navigating VUCA using the 4D model. It's all about practicing those behaviors deliberately and intentionally and mindfully. So we talked a little bit about making sure that we're including and keeping commitments, but we also want to make sure that we're sharing with everybody what the process is going to be, what this looks like, what my role is. Are we talking about roles? We're making sure that everybody understands what's going on here. Are we avoiding drama?
Explain to me. This is why I said you had questions, because you just touched on it again. The one point, how you said, how are you keeping your commitments? You need to check in on how are you keeping your commitments. How does that relate to your ability to navigate the VUCA world? Where does that fit in?
Okay. So again, thinking about the complexity of things and thinking about, I always try to think about things in the context of a relationship system, for example. I mean, and even with ourselves. So we are in a relationship with ourselves. So, if we make a commitment to, I don't know why this one always keeps coming up, as an example, but as an individual, if we're thinking, I want to become more fit. So I'm committing to becoming more fit. And I'm promising myself, I'm getting into an agreement with myself that I will begin to exercise. But, Friday afternoon rolls around and I've had a tough day, whatever it might be. I'll go and sit on the sofa, maybe have a beer and a bag of chips or whatever that might be, whatever And so we think about it from that perspective. Okay, that's fine. That's your choice. But am I keeping the commitment that I've made with myself? So what begins to happen with that? And that's, and some of these are all really small and nuanced, but they add up. So in another example, say for you and I, if you and I were, regular friends and we lived in the same town and you and I decided that on Fridays, I don't know why I keep choosing Friday. There must be something about Friday, that we were going to meet for a beer. I keep talking about that.
Yes.
So, if you said to me, hey, Jonathan, let's go to a pub, meet at 5:00 on Friday. And maybe a pub's a bad example because there's a little more looseness with times when it comes to that. So let's maybe say, let's have a meeting at 10 o'clock on
cinema and movie time, right?
Okay. So what happens when I say, Rian, okay, awesome. I will see you there at 10 minutes before or whatever it might be. And I don't show up.
Yeah.
I show up 2 minutes late. It's okay. But I go, I'm late, whatever. So what happens so when I say to you, I'll be there at 10 to 5, that's a commitment that I've made. And these are just really small examples. If I've made that commitment and I break that commitment and I keep doing it, what happens to the trust in our relationship? It begins to erode.
Now, bring that to me into context of, again, the business side of things, etc. Because I imagine there's two angles to that, right? I mean, if you get this right at the personal level, then, you are better at, setting yourself up for managing this uncertain world as well. I imagine the same happens in the business context, right? If I'm offering you a service and I'm saying I'm going to do this for you, you are saying you need to check in with how are you keeping with those commitments that you've promised the customer and so forth, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think I think what's really important here, and I hope that people might take this away, is notice when we get into a commitment. Notice when we do make an agreement. And obviously there's formal agreements where I sign something and you sign it, and then that's a formal agreement. but what are all these informal agreements that we're making with people during the day? And it might sound trivial, but it really, really matters, and because it impacts trust. And trust is probably the most important thing that we can have as a baseline for a relationship, because if we don't have trust, what do we have? So if in a situation where in a business situation for example, if we don't have trust, how do I give difficult feedback to somebody who needs to hear difficult feedback? Because if the person receiving the difficult feedback doesn't trust me, they're not going to take it to heart. It's going to be like Teflon. They're not going to take it in, and that will erode the relationship. And likewise, if if I'm an employee and I need to report something up to my manager, so this is something that I'm noticing, this is some bad things that are happening, or here's something that's not working. If I don't trust my manager, I'm not gonna report this information, and it will go unseen, and then it will come out later in a much more disastrous form.
Yeah.
Why didn't you say that earlier? Well, I didn't trust you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the idea around why being inclusive and keeping our agreements is really critical, because that cultivates trust. Those two behaviors are what cultivates trust more than anything else.
I'm loving this. I'm sorry, I was making lots of notes. That's why when I look down, I make these notes on this. But that's really good. It's an accepted truth, right, that we can't change the volatility and the uncertainty and the complexity and the ambiguity of the future, right? So, I mean, we're talking about things that we should be doing? Are there things that we need to be aware of that we should not be doing? Absolutely, like outright don't. I mean, I assume the obvious answer to that point is don't accept there won't be change, right?
Right, for sure. I think that sort of accepting the notion that this might feel good right now, but it might change. Relationships might end, businesses may fail.
Yes.
Countries may go to war, diseases may come. It's a reality.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best ways of managing this is really, again, being mindful and aware and noticing what are some of the mental models and best practices and things that I'm doing right now that I may need to let go of. And they're working right now. So part of this is not necessarily about being so much of a fence sitter that you don't ever make a decision, but we make a decision now. And in the spirit of seeking good process, we make the best decision that we have, and make sure that we've done all of these things. Make sure that we've appreciated. Make sure we've included. Make sure that we've been committed and addressed unfortunate reality. Make sure that we've clarified. We've done all of these things. Make our decision. Go forward. If it works, great. If it fails, okay. What do we do next? And I think that's the other important part about this is when things do go wrong, there's nothing we can do about it except take the idea on that. Okay, so that happened. Now what? So because we start, we begin to sort of go back over and think, oh, if I only had a chance to redo that again. Well, we don't. So how do we again sort of just step into radical acceptance and go, yeah, that's terrible, but it happened. Now what am I going to do?
It comes back to you can't go back. You can only go forward with change, right? So I do like that a lot. It also closely relates to the experience we see with people on, again, I go back to LinkedIn because we do a lot of work on it, but I see the close relationship people being very scared of doing a post and having it fail. But, you won't know, and you need to accept that some things are going to work and some things don't. You can change it and try again, do something different, etc. So the other thing I picked up from that, you've just said, so it's going to change. It's going to be volatile. So whatever you've applied now is not going to always work. So don't view it when it stops working. Don't view that as a failure, right? View that as change happened. I need to adapt and do something different now.
It's just the evolution of the way things roll, right?
The way things roll. Okay.
I think that's
a t-shirt. That's a t-shirt, John.
Yeah,
it's just the evolution of the way things roll.
One of the things that I think that we need to also do to manage VUCA and to exist in VUCA in the best way that we can, because I think what is this really all about? It's really about us showing up and being the best us that we can be. We want to do that. We all want to do a good job. We want to be the best person that we can at doing whatever it is that we do. Because then we'll enjoy it much more. I mean, so much about this is, is just enjoying life a little bit more than creating struggle for ourselves. And I think that one of the things that we want to do is to become get comfortable with discomfort, and notice again, are being mindful about when we notice ourselves becoming uncomfortable with something. And this is again why sort of a mindful practice and really checking in constantly and being self-aware. I'm noticing that I'm not really comfortable with what's going on right now. So a lot of the time our first reaction might be, well, I'll look over here, or I'll do something else. I'm out of here. I might run away, whatever it might be. But if we can't, then what do? If it's our job to do something and something uncomfortable comes in, then what do? I think that what we need to do is notice the discomfort, and instead of trying to resist it or blame the discomfort or blame somebody else, the curious question, the learner mindset question around this might be, what's here for me to learn? And that is where we can begin to become a little bit curious about what's going on for us. And we start to dig down and ask questions about, what is it about this situation right here that's making me uncomfortable and nervous? And when we can be sort of aware of that and honest with ourselves, then we can begin again to make choices and make sure that we're in choice. Because as long as we have access to choice, we have some power over what's going on. We have a little bit of control. Yeah. And when we lose our choice, we often just give our choices away by saying, oh, there's nothing I can do. Yeah. And if we have that choice, then we might have to do something uncomfortable. We might have to speak to somebody we don't like. We might have to, do a job that we're not necessarily comfortable in doing, or we might have to appreciate somebody. That's right. So it's whatever the discomfort is for you, that's your sort of, that's your learning edge, your growth edge, and that's where we grow. We never stop growing.
We don't know. Jonathan, look at the time, 57:28.
Wow.
This is when the conversation is really good. You don't notice the time. I want to try and get us to summarize, some practical points that, those who are listening and those who are watching this, and obviously in our circle, travel agents, travel management companies, who are worried about, the Vuca world, etc. Can we try and summarize some guidance?
Wow.
I know, but let's, I made some notes, so that's a good thing.
All right.
So,
all right.
Let's start with get into the moment, ground yourself, think about it. Don't just respond with the emotion or the rational thought, think about your commitment to the situation, to your role, etc. What can you control in it, right? And accepting the fact that change is happening and it is volatile. So, you can't just decide, this is the way it's going to be and it's going to be like that forever. So that's a starting block, right there. You talked about your, obviously we talked about keeping notice of your commitments, but also authentic appreciation. We didn't really get to talk much about that, but in our industry, that is so valid. There's so many different roles in a TMC that many times go unnoticed, and other, supporting roles inside your organization, which make a huge difference to you, and which a lot of people are now noticing with people on furlough and away from the office, etc., realizing, oh yeah, these guys in that department really carry the business actually. So just making sure that takes place. Your point about, we talked about this, about the managing our mindset and addressing. No, I can't read my reality. Unfortunate reality.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's right. And then asking yourself, what am I here for? It sounds like obvious things, right? But it's just things we don't necessarily think about in the moment.
Or much at all. I mean, when they come out, we go, yeah, that's obvious, but do we really take the time to think about it? So I think what I'm really inviting people to do around this is to I mean, there's so much that we can do, but I mean, really begin to ask questions and sort of notice, when we're judging things versus having a learner mindset, thinking about what, I mean, a great example, and I know we're out of time.
That's okay.
But if we're in a conflict with another person, what's one of the first things we think about? We think about what's wrong with this person, and that's the judger mindset. We've already decided, we've already made a decision that there's something wrong with this person.
Yeah.
But if we can sort of think about how do I switch this into a learner mindset, we might want to say something like, and this is a great thing around creating empathy for others, which is critical, is I wonder what this person needs. I mean, it's addressing the same difficult person, but from two different mindsets. So, and again, thinking about what does this person mean? Doesn't mean that we're giving in to their nonsense or we're somehow bowing down or scraping or kowtowing, but we are actually then empowered thinking, I wonder what they need. How can I, what might I be able to do for this person? And think about what happens. I mean, I think some of our most, our greatest client victories are when we win over a difficult client.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Jonathan, we are out of time. I want to ask you, this is going to create a post on my profile. I would like to know whether there's a recommended resource you can comment on in the post once it's live, once it's on my page. It will do so a few seconds after this ends, just for people to go to a website, a place they can go to, your website, something like that, where they can just read a bit more about Vuca.
Well, I think that, what, can I put up my...
you can. I don't know. I see your logo is hidden behind your name now. I'm sorry about that. I don't know a way to move that.
So you know what? I'm just going to pop up my email address just for, and my website is 4dcoach.ca.
Okay, brilliant.
I've got reading there. I've got a reading list there, and I'll be adding to that. And I think that, the most important thing that we can do is to, just make sure that we're continuing to be mindful, be self-aware, continue to learn, continue to think about, how can I experience growth here, and be curious about the world. I think curiosity is a very important thing to have in all of this.
Did not kill the cat, right? So.
No. Well, that's why cats have 9 lives, right?
Excellent.
So we should do this again. I mean,
we should do this again, Jonathan. That was fantastic. I really, like I said to you, you got in touch, and I thought, what is this guy going on about? But yes, it's fantastic. Again, this will be a recording on the profile, so that will be there. I see Rudolph commented he says he's loving the conversation. So thank you for that, Rudolph.
Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you for your time today. That was much appreciated. Thank you for supporting mental health awareness and travel. And for those watching, there are plenty more sessions coming up this week. Just have a look at the RibbonForTravel.com website. So with that, Jonathan, I'm just going to play a bit of an exit. You can stay on, and I'll catch up with you after. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Rian. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.